Kimberly Crenshaw talks about, overlapping marginalized identities and compounding the negative experience or outcomes, especially when it comes to both a person of color and a member of the LGBT community. This is absolutely true. And I agree with her assessment of this for various reasons. Generally, we're looking at racism compounded with homophobia. That in and of itself is a complexity and a nuance that needs to be broken down. But I also want to recognize that I don't deal with misogyny or transphobia. Those are additional compounding elements that, quite frankly, I am privileged not to be exposed to, but I want to make sure that we're recognizing that as well. Looking further into how this impacts, particularly folks like me, I know that I have lighter skin and that I'm not a trans person and not a woman and not a trans person of color. And so on the spectrum of how these get compounded, I still experience a good handful of these, but not to the extent that most of members of this community experience. And so when we're talking about being LGBTQ or queer and the gender identities that come with that, when we're looking at white gay men versus gay folks of color, there's already an inherent racism built into that systemic structure that kind of goes unsaid and untalked about unless we kind of confront it and make ourselves uncomfortable with it. When we're talking about Native communities, particularly mine, we look at kind of the two-spirited person, where we capture, the entire element of that individual and really empower that and elevate that. But when we're looking at the Latino perspective, I have to incorporate, being Catholic, being raised Catholic, and later also, identifying as LDS later in my life, which those two religions have their own complexities with race and the LGBTQ community. And so these ultimately have a huge impact in how we're looking at equity, how we're looking at, just treating others with respect and humanity.
Intersectionality is not something that exists in a book. It's something that actually lives within so many of us. And I can't claim to understand the international aspects of what it means to intersect, but I do know that within the world that we live today, our identities are completely dependent upon the perceptions of others. And they're really still being developed, I think, depending upon who you are and where you live. So these identities that are now being accepted are still growing and are still maturing into realities that I don't think any of us truly understand. When the big B goes up in the sky, the big LGBT can also go up, and so can the W or the M. And what I mean by that is being a Black person, an LGBT person, a man, a woman, an immigrant, whatever it is that the identities that you possess or that someone perceives that you possess, you're often having to react to their perception. For me, being a person of color, a mixed race person, African-American, Latino, or white, LGBT, all of these things have made me who I am, but have also forced me to react to other people's impressions of who I am. And everyone wants to have a litmus test for what it means to be whichever identity that you encompass. But your own personal understanding of it is really what counts. And as any of us have the freedom and right to do, we can continue to define that as we live and as we go. So I think the most important thing about holding multiple identities is holding on to yourself within everyone else's perception of you.